2018? One. Not even one. It was under 1 point to a guy. Did he get convicted of his drug and everything else? Andrew Gillum. He was running against a guy that was a drug addict who might or might not have had relationships with male prostitutes. All I can say is Ron DeSantis barely won in 2018 to then win by 20 points in 2022. And what they have done and perfected in Florida is voter registration and absentee ballot chase. They've used every lever at their disposal to reach voters on the right. The Florida conservatives, they banked 3 out of 4 or 4 out of 4 voters, and they chased those low propensity conservative voters or independent voters that they think would vote for them. Instead of following the Florida example, though, we've been chasing votes instead of ballots. We've been too heavily focused on election day voting. We've discouraged our voters from participating in absentee ballots, specifically one person who I'm a big fan of, Donald J. Trump. If you've noticed, some of his messaging on this has changed because the team that is running the Donald Trump re-election campaign, guess what they used to do? They used to run the Florida GOP, and they used to execute a significant absentee ballot chase program. Those are the people running the Trump campaign. Susie Wiles, another one is my brother-in-law, and they have been convincing Trump. We understand, we know paper ballots, election day only voting, all these things. They have been winning for election after election in Florida by embracing the rules and conducting absentee ballot chase programs. And I'll show you how amazing it is when you look at some of these statistics. But instead, we've been kind of discouraging our voters from doing this. And then to top it off, we've been severely underperforming with light voter registration and light early voting, get out the vote. What do I mean by that? You guys remember the 72-hour program for the RNC? Were any of you ever involved with that? It was the last 72 hours of an election, drive people to the polls, door knocks, phone calls, all these things. That doesn't work anymore. That's a day and age long gone that will never come back, at least in the short term. We have to stop thinking about election day and embrace election season. This is what the left has done. When does early voting start here in Virginia? 45 days out. There are a lot of other states like Arizona. It's 4 weeks out. Do you know when ballots drop in North Carolina? 60 days out. Okay, so for us to have in our heads that we should only focus on election day and election day voting, guess what? They're going to be on second base as we're at home plate, and it's very hard to catch somebody who's already rounding second when you're starting at home plate. Okay? We have to change our thinking on all of these fronts. I didn't think we wanted to vote early. Well, time to play the game by the rules laid out. You might not like the rules. Trust me. I've done this training all over the country. Typically, 85 to 90% of the people in the room, yeah, that makes sense actually. We need to start readjusting our thinking, our tactics, our strategy. There's 10 or 15% who go, no way, don't like it. Continue to howl at the moon. These are the rules of the game. How do you change the rules of the game? You have to win the game by the current rules. If you win the game by the current rules, guess what you get to do? You then get to have a conversation about what you want the rules to be moving forward. And I'll be honest with you. I gave this in Minnesota back in April, and the next morning spoke at an event. Two of the ladies had been there the night before, came up and said, be honest with us. If you won and achieved political power by what you discussed last night, would you change the rules? I said, being perfectly honest, if I sent the left into the political desert for generations, I'd be a fool to give up those tactics. So, let's achieve political power by the rules of this game. If we achieve it and we like the rules, as they are laid out right now, then we can have a conversation about whether we keep them or we change them. But you can't even have that conversation until what? Until you have political power. Okay?
You gotta win.
You gotta win. You don't get to change the rules until you win the game by the current rules. So win the game, change the rules. There's only one goal in an election. To win. What was it Vince Lombardi said? There's either winners or losers. Okay? You don't get a prize for getting second in a political election. The only prize is winning. The only prize for winning is having political power. Those that lose get nothing. All right? There's no like, hey, you did a great job, you got second, and it was close. You gotta win, and we must play the game by the current rules laid out and win. And I think this is something we on the right have we've lost sight of. We have the best ideas, and we do. We want to play the game by rules that we think they should be played by. You're not living in reality. All right? The whole goal is to win. Politics is policy. We have to win politically. If we win politically, we can implement the right ideas, but only if we win politically and use the right tactics and strategy to actually win. So every state has its own ballot collection laws. Okay? Your first step to do this is to look at the laws and follow them exactly. Virginia Department of Elections website has a section on what you can do in regards to and what these laws look like. Another great resource is VATP.org and also the Virginia Legislative Database. I'd also throw out another great resource. Are you guys familiar with ballotpedia.org? Ballotpedia is another great resource for you guys as well. 25 states and DC allow ballot harvesting at some level. In 11 states, pure ballot harvesting is legal. 46 states allow early voting. And again, it varies. You know, in North Carolina, they drop ballots 60 days out. Arizona, it's 4 weeks out. Here, it's 45 days out. So understand the rules. Again, current rules, and again, these are just the top lines. Early voting starts 45 days out prior to Election Day, in person, or obviously ballots drop and you can return your ballot by mail. Anyone can apply for an absentee ballot for any reason. No excuse, absentee ballot. Ballot harvesting is legal. Anyone chosen by the voter may return their ballot, even if it's somebody knocking on the door. Of course, it's not quite that simple, but essentially, if you decide you're bringing your ballot to church, the Cornerstone, and turn it in, they have to follow a few guidelines, but you can do that. Anyone requesting a mail-in ballot is added to the permanent absentee ballot list. You must opt out if you don't want to be on. So guess what we want to do? We want to go find those mid to low propensity voters and get them to request an absentee ballot so they will be on the permanent absentee ballot list. So every election they will actually get a ballot. We know they'll have a ballot, so we can go then and have a conversation with them about returning the ballot after they filled it out for the right candidates. Okay? Follow these laws exactly. Now, Florida. Florida has had a holistic approach to how they have approached winning elections. Why were conservatives able to win the overwhelming majority of statewide races since 2000 in a state until very, very recently was majority liberal registration? The answer is a robust and well-funded absentee ballot chase program, of which there are various aspects, which I'm going to explain. So the Florida case study looks like this. So since 2000, they've won an overwhelming majority of the statewide races. Since 2010, Republicans have won 21 out of 24 statewide elections in a state where Democrats outnumbered Republicans until the last few years. Now, look at the partisan gap in 2018. 257,000 more registered Democrats. Who won the gubernatorial race that year? Ron DeSantis. Who won the Senate race that year? Rick Scott. In a significantly partisan majority state. Partisan gap shrunk in 2020. 97,000 more registered Democrats. Who won that state that year in the presidential? Donald Trump. By 3.5 points, which at the time was considered something of a blowout for Florida. Partisan gap in 2022. 383,000, almost 384,000 Republican majority. What happened? Did more Republicans just move into the state? Did somebody just click their finger and magically they had more registered Republicans? No, about 5 years ago, the Florida GOP decided we are going to invest about $1 million to $2 million a year into registering more voters. They committed to it. They decided that we are not going to win by narrow margins anymore. We are going to turn Florida into a majority registered, Republican registered state. They have continued to expand their lead. The last statistics I saw, there are now 680,000 more registered Republicans in Florida than there are Democrats. What does that mean? What do you think it means for 2024? Well, 2024 presidential. Florida's not a battleground state. Take it off the battleground map. Florida has always traditionally been a battleground state. It's no longer that because Republicans have decided in Florida we are going to be serious about voter registration. We are not going to hope that somehow magically we get more registered Republicans. We're going to have intent. We are going to be focused on it, and we're going to make sure we're doing it year in and year out. So now, Florida has a significant voter registration advantage. They've also decided that they're going to have a robust and well-funded absentee ballot chase program. The GOP spends about $10 million plus over 6 weeks to essentially chase 1.1 to 1.3 million absentee ballots to get 80% return. That's the Florida model in a nutshell. We have 6 weeks to collect 80% plus of 1.1 to 1.3 Republican or Republican-leaning absentee ballots. And if we hit 80%, we are going to be so close coming into election day, we're going to end up crushing them on election day because we've always outperformed them on election day. So they have spent time in absentee ballot, early voting, election day. They've put money into all of that, and they've done early investment into voter registration and into the absentee ballot chase. So when I say voter registration and increasing your base is absolutely part of the absentee ballot chase program because you expand your universe. And some of the things I'm trying to work with on people that are doing voter registration efforts in Arizona, Nevada, Wisconsin, and some other key states, trying to get the newly registered voters to then request an absentee ballot to make sure that they are going to vote in 2024. Although, do you guys know the statistic for those that register to vote in the next election, how many of them actually turn out to vote? Typically 70 to 80%. They turn into super voters. This is another thing the left has done very well. They do their voter registration, timing it in such a way as it leads into the next election cycle, and guess what? A lot of those people are going to vote regardless of whether they have an absentee ballot or not because they're registering to vote with intent because they want to vote in the next election. So a robust absentee ballot chase program looks like this. Voter registration to grow the base, getting more low propensity and lapsed voters that maybe haven't voted in the last couple of elections, to get them to request an absentee ballot. Chase ballots the moment they drop, which again here in Virginia is roughly 6 weeks out, 45 days. Continue the chase all the way into the deadline and do heavy get out the vote the moment early voting starts and heavy get out the vote on election day. Again, going back to what I said earlier, this is not about election day, it's about election season. Voter registration in the state. How do you do it? It depends on the money, I'll be honest. There are people that have significant resources, thankfully, that are on our side, that are doing targeted voter registration efforts in key states. But when do you do it? In an election year, summer registration deadline, if you have limited resources, or like the Florida GOP, they've just made that commitment, $1 million to $2 million every year, we're just gonna do it. Some years are gonna be better return, dollar cost average, but they're gonna do it. Rough cost, organic versus paid, peer-to-peer texting program. So in organic, it's free, right? You show up at gun shows, you show up at church. You show up at events where you think there might be potential people that are not registered to vote, that if they got registered to vote, would be your voters. Paid, you're looking at $40, almost $50. That's why I say a lot of people don't have those resources to do that, but you guys have the ability to do organic voter registration. Are you guys familiar with Scott Pressler?
Yes. Yes.
I call Scott Pressler the Johnny Appleseed of voter registration because he is a constant. Are you registered to vote? He carries with him voter registration applications. We should be doing the same, right? At every event where you go, gun shows, try and get a table at a gun show, talk with your church, wherever it is, get people registered to vote. So 5 states, including DC, Virginia, and Arizona, allow any voter to join a permanent absentee voting list. So again, what we want to do in Virginia and Arizona where this takes place, get people registered to vote, get them to request a ballot. They're on that permanent absentee ballot list. So look at these states. This is current, as best as I could find a couple days ago, the advantage or disadvantage Republicans had in these key states. In Arizona, there's 192,000 more registered Republicans than Democrats. Granted, about a third of the state is independent. In Nevada, Republicans are down by 80,000. In Pennsylvania, down 445,000. In Louisiana, down 188,000. But what just happened in Louisiana? Was anybody following that? Landry won the governor. We also won lieutenant governor. Anybody see what happened in the runoff on November 18th? We swept all the statewide. You can do it, obviously, because a lot of the Democrats in Louisiana are not the crazy, freakish left. They're kind of the old school liberal, old school blue dog Democrats. North Carolina, Republicans are down to 276,000. So there's work to be done in some of these states. Trump, though, has won North Carolina both times, 2016 and 2020, although Biden will be putting a lot of resources in for next year. So it's time to get to work. And if we don't, we're going to keep losing. We cannot afford to lose. Identify absentee ballot request deadlines for your state. Identify presidential election only voters and lapsed voters. So I was doing this training in October in Arizona, in a little place, Dewey, Arizona. And this woman came up to me afterwards and said, listen, I've got my precinct list. I said, that's fantastic. How many are on the precinct? How many are in your precinct? She said, about 4,000. I said, that's fantastic. How many are Republicans, all this? She goes, well, I've identified all the lapsed Republican voters. Fantastic. She's like, what should I do? I said, you should start calling them and doing postcards to them, encouraging them to request absentee ballots. Starting now, leading into next year, into 2024. My goal is to encourage enough people to grab hold of this in their precincts, to go through their precinct lists and identify the lapsed or low propensity voters, and begin their own organic campaign with postcards, phone calls, emails, whatever it takes, to increase ballot requests for these low intensity, low propensity voters and lapsed voters. If we can get enough people to do that, think about if you had 20, 30 more votes per precinct nationally. It adds up. Victories in the margins. How much did Trump lose Arizona by in 2020? Anybody remember? Just over 10,000 votes. The entire state. Wisconsin was 20,000. Georgia was about 12,000. You had 20 new voters, 30 new voters per precinct. You are generating thousands upon thousands of new votes. But it's incumbent upon us to be doing that in the grassroots. Again, you identify low propensity voters, the 1 out of 2, 1 out of 4, 2 out of 4, maybe even some of the 3 out of 4. Push them to get on the ballot list. Use peer-to-peer texting, social media ads, live phone calls to push for absentee ballot requests. How many of you are familiar with peer-to-peer texting? Do you guys know what I mean when I say that? Okay, I see a few. Now, because of the rules, if you're going to be, think of peer-to-peer texting as a phone bank. Have you guys done phone banks before? Okay. Peer-to-peer texting is kind of the same, in which an individual has to be pushing a button to send out a text to an individual to begin a conversation. You can't just go, I'm going to push a button and hundreds of thousands of texts are going to go out. It has to be a system where you're actually having somebody physically push a button, right? Peer-to-peer texting. You can cover a lot of ground with peer-to-peer texting. You can start conversations and educate people, and you can do it for literally pennies per text. It's something that the grassroots should be doing more of. So the plan, topic 1 is the who, topic 2 is the how. Once you know the who, then you have to tell them the how. And the who is, again, people that low propensity, mid propensity, these are the people you're pursuing. You have to, you cannot assume that people know the rules of the road regarding absentee and early voting. I mean, this is one thing that we at American Majority view as something that has become our mission. We are going to educate people as best we can on the how and the why of absentee ballot generation, again, getting people to request, and also to chase. How do you chase? Don't assume that your supporters understand the value that voting early has on your campaign. What do I mean by that? I assume when you're supporting a candidate, you like that candidate, correct? And that's a pretty fair assumption. Would you like to save your candidate money? Because there's only been one candidate in recent times that had more money than he knew what to do with. That was Obama in 2012, and 2008. Most candidates don't have a lot of money. How are you going to save your candidate money? You vote early. Why? Because then they're not going to be sending you texts. They're not going to be sending you mail pieces. They're not going to have somebody knocking on your door or doing live phone calls, which adds up. Right? I mean, I kind of make the rule of thumb, it's usually $10 to $12 per voter if you're chasing a ballot to get that ballot returned or to get that person out to vote. Wouldn't you like to save your candidate money? You'll save them up to 4 times the amount of money if you vote early than if you vote on election day. Okay, so remember that when it comes time to vote next time. Let people know they can track the status of their ballots. You can do this now. Ballotscout.org in Virginia. You can search for your individual ballot, see if it's been returned, been tracked. So you have the ability to do this and know that my ballot has been received.
Can you flip back?
Yep, sorry. Are we gonna, do we send this out, Liz?
Yeah.
Okay, if you give us your email address, you have to give us your email address for us to send you the PDF of this. Liz is in the back. Hi, Liz. She is the executive director for American Majority Virginia. We have a table outside. Give us your email. We can send you a PDF of this presentation. Okay? The how. Again, if you're going to do something organically, and I'm encouraging everybody, it's all hands on deck. American Majority Action is going to be doing a very heavily investing in absentee ballot chase in 5 different states next year. It will be significant resources. At the same time, you guys should be doing this in your sphere of influence. It could be your neighborhood, it could be your precinct, it could be your county, right? You guys should take hold of this. Take the bull by the horns and do this. Take your identified voter list, AB request list, merge it with the current voter file, identify your supporters who have a history of voting early or absentee, encourage them to vote early, or provide them with an absentee ballot application, follow up with them repeatedly. We will demonstrate, I'll tell you what we did here in Virginia and show you it is a series of targeted harassments until somebody returns their ballot. Follow up with them repeatedly until you confirm they voted. Once confirmed they voted, remove them from your contact and spending list. So, for the sake of argument, let's say you start out with 100,000 people that you're targeting. The next day, it should be maybe 90,000 or 95,000. Every day that list shrinks of targets because people have returned ballots, they're off your target list, you're saving money, you're refining to try to get to 80%. And then once they voted, encourage them to help on the campaign or in your C4 or whatever activities you are, keep them involved. Okay? So it's, once you get the hang of it and understand, it's not rocket science, folks. It becomes very much about numbers. It is a numbers game. Let's say you start with 1,000 people in your precinct that you're chasing. How do you get 800 of them to return their ballot or vote early, right? It's just 80%. So voter outreach program, chase ballots when they drop here in Virginia, 45 days out. Identify by state when ballots are mailed, again in Virginia, 45 days out. North Carolina, 60. Start hitting people with peer-to-peer, live calls, door knocks, mail. Track real return rates in real time. What we were doing in Virginia, I'm going to explain what we did. We were doing daily reports. How many ballots have been returned? What is the percentage of return? How are we targeting to make sure we keep on flipping away at that? You pursue all the way until mail-in voting deadline. The goal is no less than 80% absentee ballot return. Florida would aim for 90%, but they usually hit 80, 81, 82%. For an example, for Virginia for next year, election day is November 5th. Phase 1 field work on issues begins in June. This is what we will be doing in American Majority Action. I'm just throwing this out as an example. Voter registration deadline is 22 days before election day. Absentee ballot request push, our deadline is 12 days before election day. Phase 2, get out the vote, begins 45 days beforehand, which is September 20th, 2024. Absentee ballots are mailed that day, and they're likely hitting 41 to 42 days out. You start hitting people with peer-to-peer text, live calls, door knocks, and mail. Saturday before election day is the last day to vote early, right? So you're putting this in and knowing exactly what you've got to do and when you have to do it. So here's what we did this year. So I made a pitch to donors. This is what we should be doing in all the battleground states next year in 2024. But we need to start doing it outside of Florida in a real world dynamic, in an election, really for us, and by that I meant American Majority Action, but even some of the grassroots, because we pay people to do doors and phones and peer-to-peer texting, to get into the habit of what a ballot chase looks like, right? And the daily tracking and the targeting and all those things. So Virginia is not traditionally a mail-in ballot state, so we kind of had to sell the idea to voters. We had some interesting conversations. I think Liz had somebody tell her that it was the work of Satan something like that. Yeah. This robust experiment in Virginia was both to generate and chase. Right? Again, generate is to get people to request the ballot and then chase those ballots to get them to be returned from inferred GOP voters, right? Because we don't do partisan registration here, particularly with low propensity voters. And we will be using this blueprint in about 5 states next year. So we targeted 7 state Senate districts, 12 House of Delegate districts that overlapped and were underneath those Senate districts. So it was ST12, ST17, 20, 22, 24, 27, 31, and then you can see the House of Delegate races below that. I'm not going to list them all off. We used door-to-door canvassing, phone calls, some mail pieces, peer-to-peer text to reach the voters. Again, we encourage low propensity voters to request an absentee ballot, and then later urge them to return the ballot. Again, our goal was to get 80% absentee ballot return in every state Senate district. We achieved it officially in 6 of 7. We came very close in 22. I think by the time the final results are in, we will have 80%. All right? You know how many of those we won? We won 5 of the state Senate races that we were playing in, and 8 of the 12 House of Delegate races. Okay? So, a couple of things here. You get to 80% of the absentee ballot return, you give yourself a really good chance of winning. It does not always guarantee that you will win. Okay, but it gives you a really good chance of winning. Because you know what the total difference was? I'm going to tell it later, but I'm going to tell you now again. You know what the total difference was in votes between Republicans and Democrats in the 40 state Senate races statewide?
36,000, 38,000?
No, far less.
2,000.
Just under 12,000. Total between 40 state Senate races combined in Virginia. Spread 12,000 votes over 40 districts. And you realize some of these were pretty razor thin. If you take out what were considered non-competitive races, the Republican vote was actually greater than the Democratic vote in competitive races. And some of these margins were pretty razor thin. All right, so you get to 80%, you better your chances of winning. So some of the conservative base opposed absentee ballot efforts as being too Democrat. It's legal. These are the laws. The courts in the various states have decided these are the laws. So I'm going to play by those laws, by those rules. We should all do that. Educate voters about using current Virginia law as written to our advantage. So the redistricted lines, I don't know if you guys are following that process of what happened here in Virginia, right? State Constitution got amended in 2020, independent commission of 16 people, elected politicians and non-elected, couldn't get their act together. State Supreme Court took over. They appointed 2 special masters, call it August, September of 21. Those 2 special masters wrote up district maps that leaned Democrat. In fact, 56 of the 100 House of Delegate races were considered lean Democrat. So we were playing a rigged game this fall. According to one of those redistricting special masters, our hopes for the maps were that they would reflect Virginia's Democratic lean, but also the fact that Republicans had just swept all 3 of the Commonwealth statewide offices. The maps were supposed to be hard for the GOP to win a trifecta under. This is why I'm not for independent commissions, and this is why I'm not for special masters drawing up redistricting lines. So there are a couple things that we learned from this trial in Virginia. One, the left requests absentee ballots. A lot of times they had a 2-to-1 advantage in these state Senate districts. And I know the numbers are a little small, but was this maybe like a week out maybe, Liz, these numbers? Okay, again, we're daily tracking. I'm having reports sent to me for the last 6 weeks, daily. How are we tracking? How many ballots have been returned? What is the percentage of return? Push, push, push. But notice, total requests for Republicans, 4,033. Democrats, 8,477, 2-to-1 margin. So one of the lessons I've learned out of this is, again, it's an education process, but Democrats are starting, in a lot of the state Senate districts, they had an advantage of 1,000, 2,000, sometimes 2-to-1. Okay, so we actually matched them, almost, 78, 79. We got to 80% in this district. I think they probably did as well. But if you get to 80% of 4,000 and they get to 80% of 8,000, 8,500, who wins? Right? So they're playing with bigger universes. We need to figure out how to shrink that gap. Again, we lost by fewer than 12,000 votes statewide combined in the state senate races. One of the only times I might have ever agreed with Karl Rove in recent times. His Wall Street Journal piece that he wrote about 10 days after the election I thought was very smart. And he said this: Virginia is a blue state that Biden carried by 10 points in 2020. Last week, Republicans won in 7 House districts that Biden carried in 2020 by up to 10 points, and 4 Senate districts that he won by up to 9 points. Democrats didn't flip a single district here in Virginia that Donald Trump won. In fact, he went so far as to say, if Republicans had performed as well as we did here in Virginia, and performed it that well in the midterms, we have maybe a 50-seat U.S. House majority for Republicans. We overperformed. A little hard to take because we lost the Senate and we lost the House. But if we perform as well as we did in Virginia this year, next year in the presidential, we should have a really good year, okay? Conservative groups and campaigns, we were able to practice this year, and we're gonna go into 2024 really having learned some valuable lessons on how to execute an absentee ballot chase program. So again, change our mentality, our entire approach on when and how we're doing get out the vote. Again, it's no longer 72 hours. It begins the moment early voting starts, 45 days out. Again, it's not election day, it's election season. All right? Gotta still be a big get out the vote push on election day. If conservatives are close going into election day, we win. Republicans always outperform Democrats on election day, sometimes significantly. Example, in Florida, Trump ended up winning by 3.5 points, but was down 100,000 votes going into election day. Blew past the Democrats and won convincingly at the time for Florida, 3.5 points. Not always, but a lot of times we'll win 70 to 80% of election day voting in recent times. But a lot of times we've been at first base on election day. Democrats are already rounding second or third, and it's tough to catch it because they have been putting so much time and effort into generating ballots, chasing ballots, and getting those ballots returned. So it's simple. If we don't adjust our tactics, we're going to continue to lose. We've lost too many winnable elections in recent cycles. Arizona was one of them. There are just over 1 million Republican absentee ballots on their permanent list that were sent out in 2022. Only 65% were returned. Again, the goal being 80%. Again, if you're going off rough math, there's a little bit more than a million. Let's say 2 million. 80% is 800,000. 65% is 650,000. How many did Carrie Lake lose by? 17,000 votes. Abe Hamadeh lost by less than 300 votes. If you had gotten to 80% return on absentee ballots for Republicans in Arizona in 2022, I can't remember how much Blake lost by in the Senate race, but I think you would have won everything. If you'd gotten to 80%. It was clear they were not doing a concerted, focused absentee ballot chase. Republicans weren't in Arizona in 2022. We have to give, so this is the thing I want to tell people though. Again, what I mentioned earlier, parallel tracks. We should be going down the path of election integrity. Where we have the political power to achieve election integrity, we should pursue it with everything that we have. If we can get ballot drop boxes outlawed, fantastic. If we can get Zuck bucks outlawed, fantastic. If we can get to the point where we have to have people have to have photo ID to vote, fantastic. So we go down that path where we have political power. Where we do not have political power, which sadly is in a lot of battleground states, we have to pursue these tactics. At the same time, I want to expand early voting participation among our base. I want them to embrace absentee voting, make it secure. Actually, at the end, I'd like to make Election Day a national holiday. Got 2 minutes? Nelson? Yeah. 2 minutes. The left doesn't want secure elections. They want elections that only they can win. They want to fortify elections, which again is their Orwellian term for rigging and manipulating to get the results we want. If we want to make our elections more secure, we need to win first and then change the rules second. When we win the game by the current rules, we can do this. We can support voter ID. You know what that polls at in minority communities, in the black community? You know what the support is for photo ID? It's almost 80%. I think it's, no, take that back. It's about 70%, 69, 70%. But still, anytime you have a 70% issue, that's a winning issue. Opposing crazy liberal laws like 24-hour voting, same-day voter registration. right? We can register day of. That's insane. In fact, I think there were, I don't know how many thousands of votes in Nevada this last time, same day voter registration, and we're not fully convinced they were from Nevada. Most of these issues, people across the board agree on. Fighting for timely election results. If Florida, the third largest state in the union, can actually post election results at 10 or 11 p.m. the night of election day, most states should be able to do that. And how do they do that? You have to have your absentee ballot, your mail-in ballot in 3 days before election day. Guess what Florida does? They start counting those ballots 3 days beforehand, so that on election day, all they have to really count are election day votes. We should have Florida-style laws implemented in as many states as possible. There's absolutely no reason California should take a month to count their votes. Last thing is, I'll close with this. Adapt or die. I wrote a piece this spring in American Greatness. The Declaration states that just powers are derived from the consent of the governed. The Declaration does not state, nor does the Constitution, by the way, just how that consent is to be secured, only that it must be secured. With the current temperature of the regime, conservatives have no choice but to consider the consent of all their voters by every legal means possible. So I would encourage you guys, if you have questions, if you want to know more about this, this is something that we are heavily focused on this year and next year. Liz has got her contact info outside the table. This is something that I'm hoping, again, not everybody's going to agree with me. That's fine. But if I get 85 to 90% of you to agree with me and implement this on some level in your precinct, as we're doing a much larger program, I feel pretty good about our chances next year. They're going to do everything they can to make sure they don't lose, but if we're doing all the right things, there are more of us than there are of them. We should not lose heart. We should actually put our hands on the plow, nose to the grindstone, do everything that we know is necessary to win. If we do it, I like our chances. Nelson, I'm done. We have time for one or two questions?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so we got time for 3 questions, and I forgot to tell you this, but usually when I go out and lecture, I do a little quiz at the end and hand out, I've got a copy of Restoring Our Republic and a copy of my other book, The Adversaries. Whoever answers the questions correctly, I'll give them a signed copy. All right. I get to ask the questions first, though. What is the current registration advantage in the state of Florida for Republicans? Go think back. No, the exact number. How many do Republicans now have in a registration advantage in the state of Florida due to their efforts?
2 to 1.
No, I'm looking for
680.
680,000. You want Restoring the Republic of the Adversaries? Restoring our Republic. Okay. All right. Next question. This is going to be an easy one, so it's going to be whoever puts their hand up first. What is the minimum percentage of return that you should be shooting for an absentee ballot return?
80.
80. All right. So I'll get you a signed copy. I'll get you a signed copy, and then we've got time for maybe 2 questions. All right, 2 questions in the back.
Dad, I think everything you said, virtually everything, is really important in this article. I disagree with one thing. I also want to emphasize, number one, we have to start with the registration.
Yes.
That's the key thing.
Yes.
Get the registration. Recruit Republican voters to register. The only other thing I would say is that you said your plan is to start field lab operations June 1st. I would suggest make it April 1st or at least May 1st because it takes way too long to go through and try to reach all these people.
So,
Be surprised.
one of the things we're going to be doing in Arizona for sure, that's one of our heavily focused states next year, but I would encourage all of you, why shouldn't you start in January generating more absentee ballots? You can do that. That's what we're going to start. We're going to start doing in January in Arizona. And I'm going to encourage as many of the grassroots as possible, wherever they're at. Go find your precinct list, find lapsed voters, or find Republican-leaning voters that are, low propensity. Start your own little grassroots campaign to get them to generate a ballot. Okay? Last question.
I just want to know if you've given this presentation to the Virginia GOP.
I have not.
They need to hear it.
I haven't. But I've given in other states where Republican apparatus has been there. Some have
And I want
embraced
to
it.
thank you for coming to us.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Listen, I love,
Virginia GOP.
I mean, Nelson, I think Nelson knows this. I love the grassroots. I love the Tea Party. Like, when he said we're brothers in arms, we were there from day one. And I tell people all the time, there are so many good people in the grassroots who are desperate to do the right thing, who want change, who want to impact their communities for the better. And it's my goal, has been my goal from day one, will continue to be my goal as long as I am running American Majority, to come alongside you, to be there with you, to hopefully equip you as best we can with all the knowledge that we've gleaned over the course of time to make you better so that you can affect change, so that we can win. So I'm more than happy to be here. I love being here.
That's why this was so important for people to come today. Because we don't know what the world's gonna look like in June. But these are actually action plans that we can implement. Like you said, we don't have to wait till May or June, we can start now. Since it's something that most of us haven't done, really. So there are multiple action plans coming out, but what will make it effective is instead of waiting until June or July, that we start working on it now, which is what we're trying to do. So Reagan George has an initiative that's really interesting and I think doable. And I'd like to bring him up to present this. He was from our Virginia Tea Party Federation Board.
Anything else? I'm with the Fairfax County Republican Committee. Several months ago, we started looking at the idea of a America First caucus, and it's starting to bear fruit. In fact, I think Mr. Emert was there Wednesday night, if I remember correctly. How many of y'all watch Dan Bongino?
Yeah.
One of the things he talks about repeatedly is don't fall in love with your politician. Fall in love with the policies and the activities that that politician does. How many of y'all are missing Trump?
Oh, I am.
How many of you are missing his policies?
Hey, man.
That's what this is about. We think that the Trump administration has given us a great gift. And this is something that can transcend Trump. And it's the America First agenda. With the caucus, what we did with it, or so far, is we incorporated, or not incorporated, but we trademarked it. We've also got a domain name. We're in the process of working on getting a website put together. There's a lot of little things that you gotta do. You gotta get bank account and all kinds of stuff. But we've already had 5 different counties approach us to become part of this. We think it can go statewide. So this is what you get with a caucus. You can grow the party, and especially grow it with people that are outside the Republican Party or don't want to have anything to do with the Republican Party, such as this people. Recruiting new America First voters with no relationship to the Republican Party. So we've got somewhere around 250,000 voters in Fairfax, but we've got 750,000 registered voters. So we're in a minority, just to start with. We've got to reach out to other groups. We can do candidate vetting. This becomes a very good list of what that candidate believes and how that candidate is going to work for us once in office. Incumbent accountability. Just because you're in office doesn't mean you should stay in office. I remember when Barbara Comstock was a representative. The Tea Party actually did a scorecard. And when I looked at the scorecard, I think with 15 different agenda items, her score wasn't much different from Jerry Conlon. And now, she's now formed a group with Kelly Ann's husband to to make sure that Trump doesn't get elected. One thing that we can do as a caucus that the Republican Party can't do is that we can endorse primary candidates. We can also coordinate with PACs. One of the things we can't do as a caucus is we can't donate money to a candidate, but we can endorse a candidate and encourage affiliated PACs to donate to them. That's something the Republican Party can't do. The other thing that's neat about this is we can recruit delegates for unit, district, and RPD leadership. And why is that important? We have a dysfunctional Republican Party in Virginia, and we have had it for years. One of the things the Tea Party was good at was pointing out the disconnects between parties. We can fix that, but we have to take over State Central. We have to get rid of about 40% of State Central that are just appointees, friends of friends. We have to be able to reduce. Hello?
We just have a flaky sound system from the hotel today.
Okay, what we'll have to do is, what we have to do with the Republican Party is we need to be able to change two things that they did when the Tea Party came into existence. The first thing they did was they made the State Central Committee bigger. They grew it by 40%, and they put appointees, friends of friends, in their place so that nobody could achieve a 75% majority rule. There is no corporation that works as a 75% majority rule. There's probably no corporation that's got an 85-person executive committee, board of directors, which is really what State Central is. We need to reduce it to only elected people, no appointees. And we can do that this year. Otherwise, it's going to be 4 years from now before we can do it again. Oh, by the way, on your table, you should have one of these. Please look it over. If you're interested, contact me. We'll be happy to help you get started. Thank you.
So we have multiple fronts, and the days of being able to attack one enemy and one target, which is what we used to do, I guess are long gone. We have to be, the only way we can be effective is to play chess now, multiple fronts, because we're being attacked by multiple fronts. So that's why I'm having these people come in and tell you some of these suggestions. By the way, for you and for the people out there that's taking a break, this whole program is going to be placed on our website and on Rumble, VATP.org. This stuff here is going to be important, and it's going to be important in November, but it's also going to be important right now, because when we go back home, we need to bring in some trusted friends to start, and maybe just 2 or 3 people at the beginning, and then we snowball it throughout the state. That's the key. And if we don't wait till June or July, but we start touching it and working at it January, February, that would be great. And on the other piece of it is the leadership of the state, the good guys, the good groups, will be meeting like we have in the last several years, but there's going to be more urgency because of the crucible of 2024. So the next group of people to speak are people who are actually having a huge track record and huge history of being impactful on the legislative level. They have the words, they have the expertise, they have the credibility, they are reliable, they are trustworthy, and they are strong. And they have been strong for a long time. The Tea Party and the conservative groups, I don't know, I really don't know where we would be without them, because they are like the think tank, and they provide us with the juice to be able to address clearly candidates or our representatives in a very strong way, because we use their language. So without further ado, one of our wonderful partners, Lindsay Zia, come on down. I feel like that game show. Come on down. And it's with the Virginia Institute for Public Policy? Yes, a wonderful organization.
Can I try the mic? For the rest of the
It's on the podium.
Yeah, I'll try to hold it right so it works. How is everybody doing? This is a hard time of day. But thank you for being here. As Nelson said, I'm Lindsay Zaya. I'm the Deputy Director for Policy at the Virginia Institute for Public Policy. And honestly, there's nowhere I'd rather be than with all of you who I know understand America, American values, and preserving them for the future. So thank you for being here, even on a Saturday, on a weekend, when there's lots of other things you could be doing, but thank you for being here and for doing what you do. So I'm up here just for a couple of minutes. I have two things I'm going to hit on. The first is a new bill reading project that the Virginia Institute is organizing. And then after I talk about that, I'm going to be introducing the wonderful Katie Thompson, who's going to share some super valuable insights with us about the upcoming legislative session. So I wanted to lead into the bill reading project with a little story. I have a bachelor's degree in history, so every once in a while I have to make it work for me. A lot of story from history. And this is one that we're all familiar with. So, as you know, because public school used to teach some of our heritage stories about the early founding and the Revolutionary War, Paul Revere made a very long night ride from Boston to Concord to warn the colonists that the British were coming. And two lanterns hung at Old North Church in Boston, also telling the same story, carrying the same message, that the British were coming by sea. And I think this is actually very fitting. Not only does it coincide with the title of this event, Against All Odds, right? Like the Revolutionary War volunteers were. But it's a good example of a warning system. And right now we are very in need of a warning system during this upcoming General Assembly session. So the big picture is that right now already bills have been drafted and are available online to be read. These bills are going to be voted on during the General Assembly session, which starts on January the 10th, 2024, and will be going through about the end of March. And so bills are dropping there now and will continue through until the beginning in January and even through the session. Just kind of backing off a little bit. And so we need a strong defense in this legislative session. Unfortunately, we anticipate a lot of things going wrong, and we need these warning systems to sound the alarm when things do, so that all of us can magnify that information through the different groups that we're connected with. And so what we're asking for is volunteers. We really need your help with this project. We'd like to organize a pool of volunteers, and then we'll be organizing them into different teams for each policy issue. So we'll have one for elections, we'll have one for K-12 education, medical and healthcare issues, and I'm taking suggestions for others as well. It just depends on how many volunteers we have, the size of the team that we can put together on each topic. So please email me if you're interested, or we have to sign up at our table outside. So either way, you can get on our list, and I need you to email me. You can email info@virginiainstitute.org. That's probably the easiest one. And my coworker Ashlyn can make sure I get the message. Otherwise, my email is lzea, that's ZEA, @virginiainstitute.org. And I need your name, your email, and phone number, and then which topic that you're interested in bill reading for. So please spread the word. We really need as many people as we can get across the whole state that are reading bills and being a part of this warning system. And against all odds, as we are, I really believe that liberty will prevail if we look to heaven for help and if we do our part. So please help us do our part. And with that, I'd like to introduce Katie Thompson. Katie represents Heritage Action for America as State Director for Virginia and West Virginia. Heritage Action is a national grassroots organization with more than 2 million activists nationwide. She was raised in a very politically active family and has a passion for service. She is a graduate of Randolph-Macon College in Virginia and George Mason University. She proudly serves her local community in Northern Virginia as a high school sports coach and active member of her church. And
my name is Katie Thompson. I am the new state director for Virginia and West Virginia for Heritage Action. And we're going to be talking about two pretty weighty topics today. We're going to be talking about education choice and election integrity. These can be kind of heavy topics, so if you want more information about anything I'm going to talk about today, please come out to our table. We have academic papers and single sheets and pamphlets and everything you could possibly need to get more information on everything we are about to cover. So I know we're running a little bit behind and I really want to be able to take your questions. So I'm going to fly through some of this information just to make sure I can get to the good stuff. So Heritage has two umbrellas. There is Heritage Foundation, which is a 50-year-old amazing think tank that has specialized in conservative policy for 50 years now. They are very well known, very well respected. And then a little bit ago, we founded Heritage Action. And Heritage Action is the activism arm of the Heritage Foundation. We are a C4, we are registered lobbyists, and our job is to take the amazing things that the foundation writes and get them implemented at the federal, state, and local level. So we like to say, they're the think tank, we're the do tank. I represent the do tank. Now, the biggest thing that sets Heritage Action apart from other organizations is our Sentinel program. There's a yellow pamphlet in front of you that outlines it in a lot of detail, but our Sentinel program are amazing activist leaders in the states, wherever you happen to be, that sign up to be the early warning system, just like Lindsay said. So our Sentinels get to take part in a strategy call every Monday. There are toolkits available. You get access to your state director, like me, wherever you are in the country. And we train you and give you information you need to be an effective advocate for conservative values in your state, at the federal level, or in your local community. So the way this works is that we have what we like to call an inside-outside approach. There's a lot more information on this in that yellow pamphlet in front of you or on the table. But we don't just talk to the legislators. We do talk to the legislators. We have great relationships at the Capitol with good conservatives and in state houses across the country with good conservatives. But we don't just talk to the legislators. We talk to you guys. We want to hear from you what you're seeing in your communities, in your states, that's affecting you. And we want to tell you what's going on. We want to be able to go to you and say, hey, this horrible thing was just put out and we need to fight it. Let's work together to approach the legislators from both their constituency and from the lobbyists so we can get good conservative priorities through and block the things that we want blocked. We cover 7 policy priority areas. So today I'm going to talk about education and election integrity. But Heritage Foundation writes on 7 different topics, including China, border security, big tech, and fiscal issues. Let's just go with fiscal issues. That covers a wide range. And protecting life. Okay, so I'm going to start with election integrity. So Save Our Elections is a project done by Heritage Action. You can find a ton of information at saveourelections.com. And what I'm going to specifically be talking to you about today is ranked choice voting and why we don't want it. So, ranked choice voting, some of you may be familiar with how it works, some of you may not. So, how it works is there are multiple rounds of tabulation. So, you get your ballot on election day. And for every different office, so there can be up to 17 offices up in a big year if you've got federal, state, and local elections going on. You get your ballot, and there's a list of people under each one, okay? And you have to rank from first to last choice each one of those people and tell us which one you prefer and in what order, okay? If no candidate wins a majority in the tabulation of those ballots, then the candidate with the fewest number of votes is eliminated, and you go to the next round. So, voters who selected the candidate that gets eliminated then get their number 2 choice as the vote that gets tabulated. And we go to round 2. So, round 2 functions basically like round 1. The voters who select the eliminated candidate, it goes to their 3rd choice. And we go on and on through rounds of tabulation, and rounds of tabulation, and rounds of tabulation until we have a winner. and it takes forever, okay? When we get to the general election, most states that use ranked choice voting in some capacity typically have a final 5 or final 4 clause. So your final ballot will have 4 or 5 candidates listed under every single one. However, in the primary, it's what we call a jungle primary. There is no Republican or Democrat nominee. Everybody who can get on the ballot is all listed there, right? So if you have 17 people who put in for district supervisor, there's 17 people listed there. If there's one person, there's just one. So your primary ballot is incredibly long, okay? So what's the problem with ranked choice voting? It's confusing, it's complicated, and it disenfranchises voters. Okay, so let's go into each one of those. It's confusing. It's incredibly confusing. So, ranked choice voting forces voters to rank every single one of those candidates, even ones they don't support. If there is someone you would never ever vote for, you still have to rank them. If there are multiple someones you would never ever vote for, you still have to rank them. If you do not rank them, your ballot does not count. Okay? We'll get to more on that later. If you do not rank them, your ballot doesn't count. So, in 2022, Alaska used ranked choice voting to select their member of Congress. On the 3rd round of tabulation, the Democrat was declared the winner, despite the fact that in the first 2 rounds of voting, the Republican candidates received 60% of the votes. Okay? So by the 3rd round, the Democrat won. Something similar happened in Maine in 2018. During their congressional election, the congressman that received the most #1 votes was defeated by the Democrat in the 2nd round of tabulation. Okay? It's confusing. How do you tell somebody how somebody got elected who did not receive the majority of the votes, right? You don't understand how your person was elected even if you have a high school diploma. Okay, and if you cannot tell a high school graduate how their person got elected, we've got a problem. Yeah, it's confusing. And Maine is an interesting case in particular. In Maine, in order to vote, not only was it a big long ballot, your absentee ballot was a booklet, and your absentee booklet came with an 18-page explanation of how you accurately fill out your ballot. You should not need 18 pages to tell somebody how to fill out their ballot accurately. Okay? So, it's confusing. It's complicated. Okay? So, since RCV makes the voting process more complicated, right, it is also more likely to have you make a mistake. Yeah? If you make a mistake, your ballot doesn't count. If you make a mistake, your ballot doesn't count. If you had every single intention of going through and ranking all of those people, and you accidentally missed one, or you marked 2 people down as your second choice, whatever, your ballot doesn't count. And it's a big, long ballot, and as already stated, it's confusing to fill out, right?
And this was all invented by the liberals.
Yes, this is the latest voting strategy from the No, it's not. When we get to that primary ballot, there can be over 100 people on that ballot that you have to rank. Okay, so we get what's called voter ballot exhaustion or ballot fatigue. Your ballot is incredibly long, your primary ballot in particular. And if you don't rank them all, it doesn't count. But let's get to the general election. They have cut you down to 5 or 4 top candidates for every single position. In a big election year where you've got federal, state, and local candidates up, there can be up to 17 races on that ballot, okay? Of those 17 races, if each one of them has 5, there are 85 names on that ballot that you have to rank, all of them. They do not have R's and D's next to them. It is 85 names under a heading that says governor, 5 names, congressman, 5 names, and on and on and on. Okay, and you're expected to know it. If you don't complete your ballot, it doesn't count. And here's the sticker. On average, in states that use ranked choice voting, it takes 27 to 30 minutes to fill out one ballot.
Oh, wow.
It takes 27 to 30 minutes to fill out one ballot. It's insane, and anyone who's worked election day in polls or has been to the polls know that that's not going to fly with a lot of voters. So what's happening is we hit ballot exhaustion, where voters are getting 15 minutes into this process and giving up and just leaving their ballots. Okay? And now we've got all of these people who wanted to vote conservative, who are giving up and saying, this is too complicated, I'm done, moving on. This became particularly apparent in California in the 2022 school board election. They realized 2 weeks later that they had tabulated incorrectly and had sworn in the wrong candidate. Okay? So here's the sticker. This math is so complicated when you get through these rounds of voting that you have to totally trust the machines counting it. There is no way to do a hand recount. Okay? The people who would be there doing the tabulations cannot do the math and the level of statistical analysis that is required to tabulate all of these ballots. So we have to trust the machines. The machines already take an incredibly long time with a process like this. Now we're blindly trusting them. We find out weeks and weeks later, actually it's 2 months, I said 2 weeks earlier, I apologize. 2 months later, we swore in the wrong guy.
Is that the same machine Hugo Chavez used?
I'm not sure exactly which one, but you're trusting the machine either way. So, it's confusing, it's complicated, it disenfranchises voters, okay? With that ballot fatigue I was talking about, nearly 1 out of every 3 voters do not rank multiple candidates for the election, and therefore 1 out of every 3 ballots don't count. 1 out of every 3 ballots don't end up counting, and they thought they voted. They went on election day, they cast a vote for who they wanted, and their ballots don't count. So, examples. In 2021, the New York mayor's race, okay? After 8 rounds of tabulation of 10 candidates lasting more than 2 weeks, by the end of that, over 140,000 ballots were thrown out. 140,000 voters cast a ballot that was never counted by the time they actually got a mayor. It's insane. So what can we do? What's our action item? We have to reject ranked choice voting, okay? We need to tell everyone who will listen, it should be easy to vote and hard to cheat. Easy to vote and hard to cheat. Arlington actually tested ranked choice voting as the way they did their Democratic primary this past cycle. And it was such a mess they got rid of it by the general election, okay? It is always easier to stop something from coming to your county, to your locality, to your state, than it is to get rid of it once it's there. Okay, so if you hear ranked choice voting coming up in your locality or coming up in your state, you need to speak up against it and tell them that you will not accept ranked choice voting as an option in your elections. Save our schools. So, yay, happy times, elections. Now, possibly slightly worse and scary for some people, education, and education in Virginia right now. So our Save Our Schools initiative, like our Save Our Elections initiative, is our attempt to fight back against the left on a number of education issues. I'm going to be talking to you today about legislation for a parental bill of rights and education savings accounts. So Heritage Action publishes an education freedom scorecard, or report card. And we have actually dropped since the last time it was published. So we were in previous years, the 20th, we have now dropped to 22nd place in the country. So we have ranked a number of issues there. I'm going to fly through this because I want to talk to you about the policy issues and the action items, but more information about all of this can be found at the table, exactly what we were ranked, why we were ranked it, and where we compare to previous years. Parental Bill of Rights. So, the problems in the school system, and I know I am preaching to the choir on a lot of this, so bear with me, I'm going to fly through the problem because we all know the problem. Schools have become ideological indoctrination centers. Yep. And as a graduate of the Fairfax County Public School System, and now a coach for the Fairfax County Public School System, I know this incredibly, incredibly well. I work with 160 teenage girls in the school system 6 days a week. Okay, and I know what I was taught, and I know what they're being taught. The lack of transparency is staggering. Despite Governor Youngkin's amazing executive orders requiring, more transparency, the local school systems aren't entirely following that. For example, look no further than Loudoun County.
Yep.
Right? Loudoun County, we all know, it's a nationally known issue in the school system now, and not in a positive direction, with a lack of transparency with parents. And then providing or referring health services without parental consent. It is easier to get transgender health care than it is a life-saving cancer treatment. Okay? The number of hoops you have to jump through as a minor to get a life-saving cancer treatment is more than to get puberty blockers. It's crazy. So what can we do about it, and what can you do about it today? Advocating for parental bills of rights in your localities. So there are 4 elements that go into an effective parental bill of rights. All of this, again, can be found at the table. Number 1, it must affirm that parents are the child's primary caregiver. Full stop. Number 2, it must prohibit racial discrimination and compelled speech. No ranked choice voting. No ranked choice voting either, but no critical race theory, right? We want to keep that out of our children's heads, out of our classrooms, and no compelled speech. Yes, we don't want to force a child to say something with which they are morally opposed to get a good grade. Number 3, we must require parental permission for all health and counseling services. You are the parent, they are not the parent, they are your child, you make the decision. And then we must institute curricula transparency. You have to be able to go and see what your child is being taught in the classroom. Okay? Getting this on the books in your locality can go a long, long way to making sure that education in your area starts heading in a positive direction. Okay. Education savings accounts. Education savings accounts, or ESAs, allow parents to receive a portion of education funds from the government in authorized savings accounts. So how this works, and it's a little bit different in every state that implements it depending on the exact statutes, but basically you get a portion of the money that would have been allocated to your child in a savings account that you can then use to buy extra resources for your child. You can use that towards private school tuition, you can use it towards tutoring, you can use it towards education therapists, textbooks, homeschool curriculum, anything you want. If you are able to get an ESA in your area, you can spend that money on anything that can help your child succeed academically.
And that's private school tuition?
Private school tuition, charter schools, homeschools, tutoring, you name it. Depending on the legislation and how it's written, that's the goal of an ESA. So we have a couple case studies. First, we've got Arizona. So Arizona was the first ESA program in the country, and it has since been expanded to universal coverage of all students. Initially, it was only for children with special needs, and it was so popular and so well used that it was expanded to apply to all children in the Arizona school system. This was actually recent. It was expanded to universal coverage in 2022. And you can see in this chart over time, as word about the ESAs grew and as use of them grew, the number of people using it expanded exponentially. By 2020, there were over 11,000 children using education savings accounts to help supplement their education. Parents love it. So this top bar is the Mississippi ESA. These bottom two both cover Arizona because universal coverage is split between 2 pieces of legislation working in tandem. But the parent popularity is off the charts. You can see in these dark blue lines. Parents love this because they're getting a check that they get to spend on their kids' education. It's wonderful for them. They get to choose how you spend the money. They get to choose what their child needs because, as you know, the parent knows the child best. West Virginia. So West Virginia recently adopted their ESA. It is called the Hope Scholarship Program. The Hope Scholarship Program, when it was enacted, got over 6,000 registered, recipients overnight. And unfortunately, the left tried to block this using an injunction, and not all of them were able to receive their money in their savings accounts and get awarded their stuff in this first couple, school years. But it is the primary concern of West Virginia conservatives this coming legislative session, is expanding that ESA coverage so that every West Virginia student gets an ESA and has money that they can use. But what does that look like to the average West Virginian family? So you can see down on the bottom, 93% of students in the school systems are eligible for the ESA, so the vast majority of students. And you can see this dollar figure down at the bottom. Each household, each child gets a $4,299 amount specifically for education. Comparing that to the average household income, that is an extra almost $5,000 check with an average household income in West Virginia of $50,000. That's huge for a family, right? That is a check coming to your home where you're worried about how to effectively allocate all of your spending. That's an extra 8% that you can only use for your child's education. That's game changing for any family, right? And by getting,
Is that $4,299 per child?
yeah, $4,299 per child, okay, for your education savings account. That makes a huge impact on a family's ability to educate their child in the way they see fit. So what can we do? We, Heritage Action, are partnering with a number of organizations to promote ESAs in Virginia, and you can start by voicing your support with your school boards, with your localities, with your state legislators, right? We work with a number of people, including Virginia Institute and Middle Resolution, for what we're calling the Virginia Education Opportunity Alliance, the VEOA, and we are educating families across the state about education savings accounts and trying to make sure that Virginia families get the same opportunities as West Virginia families to help their child in the ways their child actually needs, depending on, I'll get your question in 1 second, depending on what they see their child is struggling with. Next, point to success stories like Arizona, right? Tell as many people as you can. Tell your elected officials, but tell your neighbors. Tell the PTA mom, tell the head of the HOA, whatever it is. Tell them that it's working and show them that it is a real thing, a tangible thing that helps children. And then finally, tell us how that money could possibly impact you. Give us the ammunition we need to go fight for this legislation on your behalf. How much would that check be able to impact your child? Would that make a tangible difference? In a lot of cases, it would. So by sharing those stories with us, we're able to go to your representatives at the federal, state, and local level and fight for what would help your children best. And with that, I will take questions. Yes, ma'am.
Katie, I homeschooled my kids and I fought for stuff like this back in the day. But if you look around the room, most of us now have grandkids.
Yeah.
Is that something that you can get an ESA for your grandkids, or does the actual parents have to apply?
So it depends a little bit state to state, but the money goes with the child. In most states, the legislation is written for the primary caregiver, and we want that because we're preventing other third parties from getting involved, like other activist organizations, etc. Remember the parental bill of rights, we want the parent to be the child's guardian, right? We talked to a lot of grandparents about this issue, and we found that a lot of times when you can show a mom, a parent, a guardian, this is the dollar amount that you would get to help your child, and you get to choose how it's used, it goes a long way in persuading them to sign their kid up. Does that answer
Where do
your
they
question?
go to?
So it's not on the books in Virginia right now. But if you go to the VEOA website, it's run by Middle Resolution, but the Virginia Education Opportunity Alliance, it is a bill we're currently fighting for with them. Yes, sir.
My name's Mike, I'm from Goochland County, and we had a sweep in Goochland County over 5 new school board members. And I'm very hopeful they're gonna get rid of DEI.
Yeah.
But a lot of these folks seem like they wanna replace it with nothing. And, you know, I feel like we're beyond that day. I tend to advocate for what I call quality, equality, and individualism. But as your experience, these new school board members come in, they get rid of DEI hopefully. Do they ever replace it with anything?
Yeah, so that's actually something we specialize in with Heritage, is we have, and I've got them on my table outside, we have model school board policies covering that and a number of other issues for when you're a newly elected school board member. You might not be an expert in policy writing, that's what we're for, right? We've got model policies covering that and a host of issues that you can then take as a new school board member. You've already got it, you can read through it, you need to tweak a little bit, you go ahead and tweak it. It's our model, but you can customize it to what your county, your constituency needs, and then submit it to go before the rest of the school board.
As far as the parent that receives the money per child, that they have multiple children, I mean, all that's great and everything. Are there sort of like some paperwork that the parent has to fill out on how that sort of, in
Yeah.
a general sense, how that money was spent? Because, I mean, we know how people can be. I mean,
Yeah.
the world's not a perfect place and not everybody's the same.
Yeah.
Okay, so what would you sort of give me a little bit of an education on that?
Yeah, so it varies a little bit state to state based on how the exact legislation is written. But in most cases, there are providers who say, hey, here's a host of a suite of supplemental resources, etc., that we are providing for you as a Hope Scholarship recipient, if we're talking about West Virginia. And there is a process, a very specific, there's a process to basically turn in your receipts to show, hey, I'm using this for my child's education. I have to prove that. And I have to prove that I am continuing to use it for that purpose so that I can't steal this money from the school system and go out and spend it on who knows what, right? There are backstops that are individual to the state, to the localities written into that legislation. And the reason Arizona, for example, has 2 different bills providing universal coverage, et cetera, was because they were specifically looking at some of those backstops. Yes, sir, Matt.
Regarding DEI, you mentioned, actually what I call it is DIE, death, which is when it died, America will end up dying because of the racial conflict that DEI promotes. I just want to let you know, FYI, the Youngkin administration is shortly coming out with a new alternative, so to speak, regarding DEI, flipping the DEI idea and putting something out new and different that incorporates some of the genuine values in there, not the political agenda that's in there. So hopefully that will be something positive that the school boards can implement.
Absolutely. Yeah, we're always excited to hear about new ideas in this space, wherever they're coming from. Absolutely. Any other questions?
Katie,
Yes.
why is your party of evil opposed to this? What are some of the negatives of it?
I'm sorry, can you repeat the question?
Why is your party of evil opposed to this? I mean, what are the negatives?
Yes, so the reason there is opposition to an ESA is because it's taking money, quote unquote, from the school system, right? So they want to fund the school system and they throw money at the education problem and expect it to get fixed. We're taking some of that money, but if I back up a little bit,
Teachers unions.
yeah, teachers union. So this bottom number, the return on investment rank for Virginia, we rank 32nd in the nation. The return on investment rank across the country, we look at per dollar spent, really, how good of an education is your kid getting for that money. We rank 32nd, right? Our return on investment isn't good. Throwing money at the problem isn't solving it. Yeah? But by taking some of that money that's not being effectively used anyway and giving it back to the parent to use on educational resources, we can help turn that around.
Is this per year per child?
Yeah, that number from West Virginia is per year.
Do you have to use it every year or lose it?
It varies a little bit state to state. Most states say you are required to use it every year in order to keep getting it, but not every state does. It's in the text of the legislation itself when it gets enacted.
So if you have some left over, it's just the way it worked out and they asked for it back, or is it prorated?
It varies widely state to state. ESAs are active in different localities and both localities and state level across the country. Almost every single one is worded differently, so yes to all of the above.
Okay.
Yes.
Question, how many states that have allowed their teachers to unionize have ESAs?
That's not a stat I have off the top of my head, but I can tell you that they are radically opposed to ESAs in their school system. Yeah.
Is there something in place to some sort of oversight as far as student body heads? So I'm coming from Portsmouth, and I know for a fact that the schools were using 2019's data as far as student bodies in order to remain 2019, opposed to getting less, because there were less student bodies in 2021 than there was in 2019.
Yeah.
So, is there some sort of oversight or some auditing system to prevent that from happening?
So that wouldn't be covered in this legislation specifically. I agree that that's a major issue, that's something that needs to be addressed, but that wouldn't be written into this kind of model. Anybody else? Awesome. Thank you all so much. My contact information will be on the end of this, and my cards and other papers and information about all of these topics is outside. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
This was a good conference because we had practical, pragmatic avenues of attack. We don't have to do any of them. I mean, if we didn't have the summit, we wouldn't have that choice. Now we do. We could pick our direction. But what we probably will look to do is coordinating it, and that's what we're going to do. This summit and all the information on it in the next week or two will be posted on Rumble, VATP, on Rumble or VATP.org. For those people who could not make it today, we captured this. They should see it as soon as possible, because as soon as we got this information out, we can act on it. Those people who haven't seen any of this don't know. And so it behooves them to get this information quickly. Then they can make an informed decision to either do one last stand as we enter the crucible of 2024, or give up. And it's not in me and most of the people around me to give up. We're going to get slammed, but we might as well go in a battle hurting the enemy. And we can win. And it's very possible, as you have heard, the pathways to victory are multiple. And there's every reason to believe that we can still win against all odds. So I want to thank you guys for coming. Please keep in touch with us. We're going to have a Tea Party leadership meeting after this, so we can coordinate what we learned in this and see how we're going to approach and contact and be in communication with our natural allies that were here today, and some of whom have not, like Freedom Monks. So before I let you go, any questions? Okay. Do we have a motion to say goodnight? Well, you have a safe trip, everyone. Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you, Nelson.
Yes, I know. Business meeting, the leaderships of the Tea Party, please stay here.